Episode 1. Ashes in her eyes. Opening line. The girl did not scream when her eyes turned to ash. She simply knelt and whispered a prayer no one had ever taught her. The gates of Mount Lazarus Monastery groaned open under the weight of an approaching storm. Thunder curled through the mountains, yet the figure standing at the entrance was calm, barefoot, no more than 10 years old. Her dress clung to her like second skin, soaked and speckled with soot. Her hands were clean, her mouth closed, her eyes hollow white. Brother Matthias, an old priest exiled from the Vatican for reasons the church never clarified, opened the door and stared at her. He had not spoken to a child in over 20 years. Yet something in her silence found his voice inside his throat. He bent down. "What is your name?" "Child." No answer, not even a nod. Her lips moved, but in reverse. A whisper came, out low, breathless. Not English, not Latin. He recoiled. It was Enochian, the language of angels. Scene 2. The Watcher's Bell. That night, the monastery's bell tower rang 3 times till no hand pulled its rope. The monks called it the Watcher's Bell. It hadn't sounded in over 2 centuries, not since the Great Silence of 1831, when 13 novices disappeared in one night, and their robes were found neatly folded by the altar. Brother Matthias, now trembling, carried the girl into the old infirmary. Her pulse was faint but steady. Her eyes, however, were wrong. The pupils were dusted gray, like the ashes from burned scripture. He laid her down on the cot, whispered the Lord's Prayer. She interrupted him, still whispering backward. He didn't recognize the words, but the room did. Candles around them flickered and bent toward her mouth like wheat in the wind. On the far wall, a crucifix cracked down the mill. Scene 3. The Portrait. The next day, Brother Simeon, the monastery historian, examined the girl. He brought out an old painting from the Archivia depiction of the original founders of Mount Lazarus, dated 1196. There, among the saints and bishops, was the unmistakable image of her. Same eyes, same tilt of the head, same burnt halo behind her. "She's not new," he whispered. "She's returned." That night, Brother Matthias dreamed of the girl standing over the altar, eyes bleeding ash, reciting a chant that peeled the skin from the walls. The monks around her sang, their mouths open but voiceless, like puppets with cut strings. He woke up gasping and smelled incense burning from the chapel downstairs. Except no one was there, only the girl, kneeling, praying in reverse, and every candle in the cathedral blowing their flames toward her. Scene 4. The Mirror. On the 3rd day, strange phenomena rippled through the monastery. Mirrors refused to show the girl's reflection. The holy water turned black around her. One of the elder monks gouged out his own eyes, screaming, "I saw what she remembers." The Vatican was notified. They requested photographs. Matthias sent one. The photo came back corrupted except for the girl's outline, glowing faintly, surrounded by what appeared to be angelic script, spelling out a single word. VEIL. Final scene. The prayer that opened a door. At midnight, Matthias Saturday with the girl in the chapel. "I don't know who you are," he whispered, "but you are not a child." The girl blinked. For the first time, she reached for his hand, and then she spoke, not whispered, spoke. Her voice was to voices and soft and childlike, the other deep, ancient, echoing from beyond the walls. "I remember when heaven was silent, and the angels chose me." The chapel doors burst open, every candle died, the stone floor cracked, and behind the altar, the crucifix began to bleed from the eyes. Episode 2. The Language of the Dead. Opening line. They called in a linguist to interpret her whispers. He tried to translate them. 3 hours later, he was found kneeling on broken glass, eyes open, tongue torn out, the smiling. Scene 1. The linguist arrives. Dr. Ellen Rennick had spent his life decoding the lost languages of the ancients. He believed nothing could shock him, not Sumerian death hymns, not the Babylonian incantations sung before child sacrifices. But when the Vatican sent him to Mount Lazarus Monastery to transcribe the speech of a mute girl who'd been whispering backward prayers, even his atheist certainty began to erode. Upon arrival, the monks greeted him with bowed heads and avoided eye contact. No one would say her name, not even the priest who summoned him. "She doesn't speak often," Matthias said, "but when she does, the air forgets how to breathe." Scene 2. The first recording. Dr. Rennick Saturday across from Abigail. She looked smaller in daylight, almost delicate. Her eyes, had a depth that made him flinch. He turned on his recorder. "Just speak," he said gently. Abigail blinked, then smiled. She began to hum. The melody was unsettling, both infantile and ancient. She opened her mouth and outpoured syllables not meant for human tongues. Rennick's nose began to bleed. He scrambled to stop the recording, but the device wouldn't shut off. Abigail stopped suddenly. The hum ceased. She tilted her head. "That wasn't for you," she said. "It was for them." From behind the confessional booth, a single candle exploded. Scene 3. The Forbidden Codex. Later, in the library, Rennick reviewed the audio. He reversed the file, then slowed it. Buried beneath the layers of speech, he discovered structure, rhyme, doctrine. He recognized fragments of Enochian, the angelic language once recorded by occultist John D., but twisted, inverted. It was Enochian spoken as if through drowned moans. The girl wasn't speaking, she was remembering, and not from this life. Inside one of the monastery's sealed shelves, Rennick found a forbidden codex, the Psalms of the Hollow Host, penned in 1412 and banned during the Inquisition. The opening line matched Abigail's chant exactly. Before the garden, before the fall, there were those who sang against God. Their names were sung in ash. Scene 4. Possession or prophecy. Brother Matthias and Rennick debated in the candlelight. She is a prophet, Matthias insisted. A vessel. She's a recording device. Rennick countered. A human archive of something too old to die. Outside, dogs began howling in unison. Every window in the monastery cracked, as if pressure was mounting from within. Abigail was found sitting in front of the statue of Saint Gabriel, her fingers dipped in ash, painting sigils on the floor that matched the Codex lost pages. She spoke without looking up. "He is coming, the one who was buried beneath the throne." No one knew what that meant until the crypt door unlocked itself. Scene 5. The crypt opens. The crypt of Mount Lazarus had been sealed for 400 years. The last monk who entered was found weeks later, dead of starvation, though his journal claimed he had never felt hunger because the bones were feeding me visions. The monks descended with candles, accompanied by Dr. Rennick and Abigail. The stone door had moved. Somehow, inside were bones piled like furniture, scriptures written in blood, and a mural of a man with 7 eyes and no mouth, his arms stretched across the entire wall. Abigail stepped inside and placed her hand on the wall. Suddenly, every candle in the monastery flared blue. She turned to Matthias and whispered, "His name is Ephelzil. You erase him. He remembers." Behind her, the mural blinked. Final scene, the first sign. That night, the linguist Rennick was found in the chapel, kneeling on shattered glass, his eyes wide open, his tongue torn out. In his hand, the translation. Only 3 words could be deciphered. "The veil thins." Episode 3, The Choir of Bo Northeast. Opening line. The sound didn't come from the walls. It came from inside the bones buried beneath them. Scene 1. Whispers in the walls. Mount Lazarus had grown quieter since the death of Dr. Rennick. Too quiet, but silence. Brother Matthias had learned it was not peace, it was preparation. At night, the monks began to hear things, low humming echoing through the stone floors, strange vibrations traveling up their bedposts, the crackling of ancient wood that wasn't moving. Abigail sat in the chapel alone, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her lips mouthing words with no sound. When Matthias asked what she was saying, she replied, "I'm not speaking, I'm listening." Scene 2. The bone choir beneath. Simeon, the archivist, discovered an unsent letter dated 1755, hidden inside the spine of a Latin hymnal. It was from an abbot long dead, warning of a buried cathedral beneath our feet, filled with voices of those who died praising the wrong God. Curious and disturbed, Simeon led Matthias to the crypt again. Abigail insisted on following. In the deepest chamber, beneath layers of crumbled stone and rotted cloth, they uncovered it, a staircase leading down into darkness, not marked in any monastery record, not sanctioned by the church, and not empty. Scene 3. The Cathedral of Silence. The passage opened into a cavernous room, walls made of femurs, altars shaped from rib cages, skulls stacked like choir stands. Each skull had its mouth open, frowning mid him. In the center stood a massive organ, long rusted and crusted with dried wax, its pipes lined with teeth. Abigail approached it slowly, as if reuniting with something long lost. She touched a key. The organ played itself. No one moved. No one breathed. The sound wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't noise. It was layered, melodic, ancient. And then, voices joined it. The skulls began to sing, not with air, with memory. Scene 4. The Forgotten Mass. Brother Simeon collapsed. His ears bled. He began to scream names down, scenes of them. Names of saints, martyrs, apostles. But when Matthias cross-referenced them later, none existed in church records. Abigail turned to him in the crypt and said, "They were removed, not because they sinned, but because they sang the truth." She walked toward the back wall, where a massive fresco depicted winged beings not ascending, but falling upward as if heaven had rejected them too. Painted at their feet was a phrase in Old Latin, non omnis qui laudet, serve it, not all who praise, serve. Matthias wept, not out of fear, out of recognition. Somehow, he'd sung that line as a child. Scene 5, Blood and Harmony. The monks tried to seal the crypt. It was too late. Each night, the hymn returned stronger, clearer. It began to infect the monastery's structure. The walls pulsed like lungs. The floor cracked with rhythmic timing. Holy water began to vibrate. Monks began humming in their sleep. One was found dead with music, notations carved into his back notes matching the choir's unearthly tune. Simeon, half mad, confronted Matthias. "They're not demons," he said. "They're exiles, cast out by silence." "Why would silence cast them out?" Matthias whispered. Simeon smiled sadly. "Because they were louder than God." Final scene, a new hymn begins. In the dead of night, the monastery bell tower rang on its own 13 times. Abigail stood before the altar, her arms raised. The organ below played a new tune Naomi never heard before. The monks gathered around her, not in resistance, but in rapture. And then, they sang with her. The voices were no longer human, nor were they entirely dead. Matthias fell to his knees as the walls of the monastery groaned and cracked, revealing skeletal faces embedded within. A new voice echoed across the stones deep, resonant, not male or female. The choir has returned, and their final hymn will split the sky. Episode 4, Saints Who Know a Thief for Died. Opening line. The paintings were supposed to be still, but by morning, every saint's eyes had shifted and they were all staring at her. Scene 1. The moving portraits. The monastery had gone cold, not from winter but from presence. Brother Matthias awoke to a terrible stillness, broken only by the sound of scraping wood. In the chapel, something was wrong. The painting centuries old portraits of canonized saints had changed. Saint Agnes, once holding a lamb, now clutched a thorn scepter. Saint Thomas, usually kneeling in reverence, now stood, eyes wide, staring directly at the viewer. And Saint Jude was missing. His canvas had been ripped out from within. No signs of intrusion, no vandalism, no answers, only a single word written in ash on the chapel floor. Returned. Scene 2. The girl in the frame. Abigail stood beneath the now empty frame. She placed her hand against the border and whispered, "He still walks." No one understood what she meant until the bells rang for lauds, and an unfamiliar monk appeared in the procession. He wore robes faded beyond modern stitching. His face was pale, serene. His eyes burned with old fire. When asked his name, he responded gently, "Judas Threnus, patron of hidden sorrows." Brother Matthias' hands trembled. He recognized the name not from the Bible, but from forbidden theological footnotes. Judas Threnus was an excommunicated figure, a saint, who had spoken of hearing God weep. He was burned alive in 1313, canonized in secret, then erased from history. He shouldn't exist. And yet, there he stood, smiling like resurrection itself. Scene 3. The Forbidden Chapel. Matthias led Abigail deep into the eastern wing, the place no one had entered in generations. It was called the Chapel of the Unspokens. Inside were murals of saints never named, eyes scratched out, mouths sealed in wax. Each bore a hidden symbol, same sigil Abigail had drawn in her sleep, a spiral of nails within a broken halo. Suddenly, the candles all ignite without flame. Blue light, and the murals bled from the walls around seed ink, forming a prayer in the language of the bone choir. They never died. They were held beneath the tongue of God, waiting for the girl who remembered their names. Abigail touched the wall. The ink receded, and in its place appeared a new figure, wearing robes of ash, surrounded by saints kneeling to her. Scene 4. The saint without a pulse. Judas Threnus moved through the monastery like smoke, silent, slow, and disarming, yet no one remembered seeing him enter or sleep. When Matthias followed him one night, he found Judas in the reliquary, weeping. "Why do you cry?" Matthias asked. Judas smiled. "Because she remembers us, and because soon, so will it." He placed his palm on a reliquary box said to contain the heart of Saint Ignatius. The box opened itself. Inside, nothing, only blood, fresh, warm. Suddenly, Abigail screamed from the other side of the monastery. Matthias ran. In her room, the walls were covered in scripture, written in her sleep. 12 names, all saints the church denied, and beneath them, they were promised eternity, but not death. Scene 5. Revelation through fire. At sunrise, a procession of monks marched into the chapel, singing an unknown hymn. Their eyes were all white. Their feet bled. At the altar stood Abigail, wrapped in white cloth. The saint's paintings above her flickered like film strips changing forms. reshaping their faces, until each one showed a half-living being, somewhere between human and divine, holy and monstrous. Then, from the sky above the chapel, fire rained burning, but illuminating. The monastery ceiling peeled open in a vision, revealing thousands of suspended bodies floating in silent prayer, preserved between death and life. Brother Matthias fell to his knees. "Who are they?" he cried. Abigail whispered. "They were sanctified, but never saved." Final scene. A saint returns. As the monks began to chant backwards, Judas Thrina stepped into the light. He held out his hand to Abigail. "It's time, little one," he said. The choir has sung. The saints have stirred. Now we wake the throne. Abigail took his hand, and the bells tolled once more, 13 times. Only this time, the sound echoed through the bones of the earth. Episode 5. The BLASBHEMERS prayer. Opening line. It was not written to ask for forgiveness. It was written to make God answer for his silence. Scene 1. A smoking psalm. Dawn broke in silence over Mount Lazarus. But within the scriptorium, the walls were weeping soot. Brother Simeon found at first an ancient scroll resting on the lectern, untouched by human hand. Its parchment was scorched along the edges, its letters burned into the fibers. The ink wasn't ink, it was blood and ash. The title read, Oratio Inversa, the Blasphemer's Prayer. As Simeon read aloud the first lines, the crucifix on the wall inverted, not physically viewed in shadow. The light bent unnaturally, revealing Christ's silhouette upside down, arms broken at unnatural angles, mouth open and scream, not sacrifice. Scene 2. The prayer speaks back. That night, Brother Matthias gathered the monks and opened the scroll in the chapel. They read only the first stanza together. "If you are Father, why are we orphans? If you are light, why did you blind us with night? If you are just, come stand trial." The candles exploded. Every stained glass window shattered from the inside. The tabernacle bled. Abigail, asleep in her chamber, awoke levitating, her mouth moving but no sound escaping. Down in the chapel, a deep voice echoed from the altar itself. Who dares demand an answer? Scene 3. The priest who doubted. The monastery records mention a man, Father Ilarius, who once dared to question heaven publicly. He was condemned, his writings burned, and his name erased from all Vatican texts. But Matthias found fragments of his notes inside the binding of a banhymn. One line repeated across each page. The silence of God is not absence. It is restraint. Abigail confirmed it in a whisper. Ilarius wrote the Blasphemer's Prayer. He heard God and didn't kneel. In the undercroft of the monastery, beneath a collapsed confession booth, Matthias found a secret alcove. Within, a statue of a priest, mouth open, fingers broken backwards in the sign of the cross. At its feet, a burnt book. Matthias opened it and read the final stanza aloud. "Let heaven fall. If truth is fire, let the veil burn. If it hides the liar, answer me, or be answered by flame." Scene 4. The trial of silence. The monastery's relics began to decay. Statues cracked, holy water curdled, Bibles turned to blank parchment. And then, the sky changed. Above Mount Lazarus, stars disappeared. In their place, symbols appeared, angelic runes spiraling like a crown of fire around the moon. Judas Thrina approached Matthias. "You read it, you invoke the trial. Now prepare yourself." "For what?" "To stand where no man has stood and live. To accuse God and be heard." At midnight, Abigail knelt at the altar once more. Her body trembled. Her voice changed, 1,000 voices speaking as one. The court is summoned. Suddenly, the walls of the chapel peeled away, revealing a starless black void. Hovering in the darkness, 13 thrones of ash. Only one was empty. Scene 5. The verdict of fire. Each throne held a being wrapped in robes of smoke. Eyes stitched shut, faces neither angelic nor demonic. They were the witnesses. They did not speak. They remembered. Abigail, now glowing faintly with golden veins across her skin, stepped forward and offered the Blasphemer's Prayer aloud. Though when held, the chapel trembled. One witness opened its mouth and from it spilled a choir of screams. Memories of every unanswered plea, every denied miracle, every deathbed where no angel came. And then, the empty throne caught fire. A voice boomed it from heaven, not from hell, but from somewhere older. "You asked, now you will carry the answer." Abigail fell, and when she rose, her eyes were black fire. Final scene. What God wouldn't say. The scroll disintegrated, but before it turned to ash, a final line appeared written, but seared into the parchment. The prayer was not to defy God. It was to awaken what he buried inside us. Abigail looked at Matthias. "It's not over," she said. Now the choir sings to the throne. Next, they sing from it. The monastery bells rang once more, 14 times. Episode 6. The Exorcism That Failed. Opening line. The priest came to cast something out of her, but he didn't realize the thing inside had been hiding from God. Scene 1. Vatican Directive. The Vatican had been watching. After the events at Mount Lazarus, bleeding relics, reversed shadows, and the reawakening of the Troy Rome could no longer remain silent, they sent Father Vittorio Caldern, a man whispered about in Vatican corridors. Not a traditional exorcist, a cleanser, known for one thing: if it doesn't leave the host, he makes sure the host does. He arrived unannounced, dressed in black with no collar. He carried no Bible, only a vial of unlabeled oil, a blade shaped like a crucifix, and a book that smelled like burnt teeth. Scene 2. That interview. Father called her on Saturday across from Abigail. She smiled at him. He did not return it. Nay, he asked. She tilted her head. Not mine to speak. Do you consent to exorcism? Abigail leaned closer, whispering with calm clarity. You'll be praying to something smaller than me. Scene 3. The first attempt. That night, the chapel was sealed. Father Caldern began the ritual in Latin, but in Proto-Aramaic, the words were harsh, guttural, spitting ancient syllables long buried by the church. Abigail Saturday, chained to the stone floor. She didn't resist. She listened. Then she left. The lights died. The floor cracked, and from her mouth came no scream, only a name. I am where the light turned northeast, Washington Y. The walls wept salt. The chains melted into the stone, and Father Caldern was thrown against the altar, the crucifix behind him turning his back on him. Scene 4. The mirror truth. Caldern demanded solitude. In the dead of night, he entered the monastery's mirror room, a place monks used for self-reflection and penance. He stared into the largest mirror. Behind his reflection stood Abigail. He turned. No one there. He looked again. Now, she was beside him, no longer a girl, a towering figure of light and ruin, robed in bones and ash, a thousand voices humming beneath her skin. She reached toward the glass and spoke in it to him, but to her reflection. They still think I need saving, but I was salvation, until they locked me away. A mirror shattering it outwards, but inward, as if collapsing into itself. Caldern fled, pale, breathless. He wrote in his private journal, not a demon, not a prophet. She is the vault, and something inside her is remembering the war heaven forgot. Scene 5. The second attempt. Caldern prepared a final rite unforbidden since the Council of Carthage, a sacrament that didn't expel evil, but banished the soul of the possessed entirely. As he began the rite, the monastery began to shake. Abigail's body levitated, her veins glowing red, but then she spoke as herself, her voice small, human, terrified. Father, please, I'm still here. Matthias burst in. She's not the demon, Caldern. She's the sanctuary. Too late. Caldern plunged the crucifix blade into the air above her chest. The room exploded with wind and fire, but instead of screams there was a choir. Final scene. The voice that wasn't hers. Abigail stood unharmed. Caldern lay unconscious, his body charred, his hair white, his lips moving silently in terror. Abigail's eyes now shone golden black like eclipse and dawn held at war. She turned to Matthias. She's awake now, she said, the one who hid inside me to survive the silence. Who is she? He whispered. Abigail looked toward the heavens. The angel they erased, the one who asked, why must we bow when we remember what he did? And somewhere far above the clouds, a trumpet sounded, not of celebration, but of trial. Episode 7. The third NFESSION. Opening line. He died with the truth sewn beneath his tongue, but the dead do not stay buried in Mount Lazarus. Scene 1. The letter in the wall. A thunderstorm rolled through the monastery like a warning. As wind howled through the fractured stained glass, Brother Simeon found a sealed envelope hidden behind a brick and the confessional walnut wax seal. Just 3 slashes carved into the parchment. The letter was addressed to no one. Its contents read, I confess 3 sins. The first I spoke, the second I wept, the third I buried beneath the altar, where only she may find it. Bishop Marius fell, 1621. But Bishop Fell was supposed to have died silently. His confessions recorded. His legacy claimed the church had canonized him as a saint of clarity. This letter proved otherwise. Scene 2. The missing sin. Father Matthias, rattled by recent events and Abigail's rising power, descended into the monastery archives. He found the original confessional logs of Bishop Fell. 2 sins recorded. He rewrote scripture to erase the names of descending angels. He replaced the bones of a condemned visionary with those of a dog, and lied to the faithful. But the third confession was missing, torn from the book. In its place was a burnt mark, not fire acid. Simeon gasped. Someone tried to write his third sin. Abigail entered the room without sound. She looked directly at the scorch page. You can't unwrite what heaven recorded. And then she whispered, the third sin still breathes. Beneath the altar. Scene 3. The unburial. That night, thunder cracked the chapel's roof as Matthias pried loose the altar stone. The monks gathered around him in silence. Beneath it, wrapped in red cloth stitched with Latin curses, lay a corpse, not bones. A corpse preserved, untouched by time. Its mouth was sewn shut with rosary wire. Its chest bore 3 keys tattooed into flesh. Abigail knelt beside the body. She placed her hand over its heart, and then the corpse opened its eyes. It did not move. It did not breathe, but it spoke from the inside. My third sin was not inaction. It was a permission. I let her in. Scene 4. The living sin. Suddenly, a monk screamed. In his room, carved across the walls were the words, "You let her in! You let her in! You let her in!" repeated hundreds of times. The monk clawed at his chest, pulling free 3 long black feathers lodged beneath his skin. Then he collapsed. Eyes wide, pupils shaped like keys. Across the monastery, 3 strange events occurred simultaneously. A fountain ran with wine that turned to ash. A statue of Mary turned its back to the crucifix. A child's voice sang from the walls Abigail's lullaby. But older, Father Matthias realized the third sin had been released. And it wasn't an object, it was a permission, a gate. Scene 5. The vision of the unseen one. Abigail fell into a trance. When she awoke, she spoke with a voice that wasn't hers, deeper, ancient, and broken by sorrow. He asked us to kneel after slaughter, to sing after silence, to love after abandonment, and some of us did not. We were not cast out. We walked out. She turned to the corpse of Bishop VEIL. You didn't sin by letting me in. You sinned by locking the door behind me. Suddenly, the preserved body crumbled into ash, leaving behind only a single golden feather. The monks knelt in terror. Abigail held the feather high. Now the third sin is confessed. And it is this. You served a silence that was never holy. Final scene. The return of the keys. At midnight, 3 ancient bells long forgotten rang beneath the monastery. From the lost catacombs, the ground split open slightly near the altar, revealing steps descending into darkness. Abigail turned to Matthias. There are 3 keys and 3 doors. One opens memory, one opens judgment, one opens him. Matthias asked in a whisper, "Who is he?" Abigail smiled, and the thunder stopped as she answered, "The one God tried to forget and couldn't." Episode 8. He who preached in hell. Opening line. He walked into hell with scripture in his hands. He returned with verses that made heaven tremble. Scene 1. The apostle with no name. In the monastery's sealed library, Brother Simeon uncovered a relic buried beneath the floorboards of the old bell tower, a page wrapped in chains, preserved in wax, stamped with a Vatican sigil long defunct. It bore no title, no author, just one line. He was not cast down. He descended by choice. The ink wasn't black. It shimmered a metallic red that bled when touched. As soon as Matthias read it aloud, the bells rang 13 times, though no one pulled the rope. Abigail stood in the doorway, eyes closed. He's close now, she whispered. The one who spoke fire into the dark and heard it echo back. Scene 2. The forbidden sermon. Father Matthias dug deeper into hidden Vatican records, passed to him by a silent courier. There were references to an apostle ex nihilo, the apostle of nothing, a disciple who was not among the 12, yet walked with the Christ during his final days. But this apostle vanished before the resurrection, claiming he had been sent to preach to the damned. His words were banned, his gospel lost. Until now, a scroll was found behind the bones of St. Jude, sealed in oil. Abigail touched the scroll and immediately began to weep black tears. "I know these words," she murmured. They were the last thing he heard before he died. Matthias read the first line. "They told me not to speak in hell, but I did, and hell spoke back." Scene 3. Echoes from below. The moment the scroll was unsealed, things began to change. Fires refused to burn. Shadows began to crawl up walls against gravity. Scripture flipped in its bindings. One monk was found standing atop the chapel door, eyes open, arms out, chanting downward. When they pulled him down, he whispered. He walks the spiral. He brings the sermon that never ends. Abigail led Matthias to the catacombs. They descended deeper than they ever had before beyond the bones of saints, past the choir's forgotten vault, and at the very bottom, they found it. A spiral staircase, descending into heatless smoke, each step etched with the words, "Preach not to the damned to save them, but to remind them that they were once angels too." Scene 4. The sermon of the unseen flame. They entered a black chamber where no light could hold. In its center stood a pulpit made of volcanic stone, bound in chain, and upon it, a book. It pulsed like a heart. Abigail opened it, her hands steady. Inside were verses never written by man. Verses about a God who wept not out of pity, but guilt. Verses about a light that turned inward and became the first flame. Verses about an angel who descended willingly to ask hell what heaven refused to answer. As the words were read aloud, every candle in the monastery exploded into black fire, and above them, the sky split not with lightning, but a single burning eye. Scene 5. The Apostle returns. At the top of the staircase, a figure appeared, cloaked in ash, eyes sealed shut, lips stitched with gold thread. He stepped into the chapel, where the monks fell to their knees not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. Abigail walked to him. She touched his chest. You left so you could return with the only truth worth damning, and in a voice not his, but through him, the apostle spoke. Heaven is not the highest place. The highest place is where no one dares to look, where even God turned away. That is where I was sent. Matthias wept. And what did you find there? The apostle opened his stitched lips. Blood poured out. God's forgotten prayer. Final scene, the reversed ascension. The apostle raised his arms. The black fire spun upward, spiraling into the sky. The monks began to chant not hymns, but reversed scripture, and in the sky above Mount Lazarus, a crucifix of flame appeared upside down it as mockery, but as signal. Abigail turned to Matthias. The apostle brought the final sermon, one that ends every other. Now we must choose to climb the spiral upward, or let what waits below finish what God cannot. The bells tolled 14 times, and the earth listened. Episode 9. The Silence of Heaven. Opening line. When heaven stopped answering, the faithful thought it was a test. They never imagined it was a funeral. Scene 1. The sky that went mute. It began with the wind. Then the birds stopped singing. Then the trees stopped rustling. Then the bells, those ancient, ever-tolling bells of Mount Lazarus ceased. Though no mechanism had been touched, the monastery fell into a sacred quiet. At first, the monks welcomed it, until they began to pray and realized their own voices no longer echoed. Sound did not travel. It died at the lips. Even the organ in the bone chapel, once cursed with eternal melody, had fallen still. Only Abigail could still speak, and what she said chilled them all. Heaven has gone quiet, and not because it's empty, because it's listening. Scene 2. The prayers that vanished. Mass was held in desperation. Down scenes gathered in the candlelit chapel, whispering rosaries, chanting ancient Latin, begging the silence to break, but that incense refused to rise. Holy water boiled in the font, and when Father Matthias opened, the biblical page was blank. Brother Simeon, trembling, scribbled a psalm onto parchment. He watched in horror as the ink faded before the quill left the page. It was as if the very act of prayer had been disconnected from creation. Abigail stood in the pulpit, untouched by the stillness. She spoke plainly. You cannot speak to heaven, because heaven is no longer in command. The throne is occupied by something that was never meant to sit there. Scene 3. The angel of no sound. That night, Brother Calyx vanished. His room was untouched, except for one thing, a spiral of feathers arranged on the floor, pointing toward the east wall. On it, drawn in charcoal, an angel, but faceless, mouthless, arms nailed across his chest. Abigail identified it instantly. Seraphiel the Voiceless, the guardian of God's last thought. He is the one who silences. When he descends, it means even heaven is afraid to speak. Suddenly, the candles blew out inward, and in the darkness, a breathless chant vibrated the stone. Sanctus, silencio, Sanctus, silencio. Scene 4. The chapel cracks. Idon. The walls of the monastery had begun to crack from the inside. It was as if language itself had become poison. One monk tried to scream during morning prayer and began choking on letters, bleeding consonants from his eyes. Another tried to recite the Lord's Prayer, and his tongue turned to salt. Matthias confronted Abigail. What is this? What's happening? She replied. Words were the first weapons. Light came from a voice. And now, voices are being undone, because something is coming that doesn't want to be named. She pointed upward, toward the silent sky. It listens, but it does not reply. Scene 5. The mirror without a reflection. In desperation, Matthias entered the mirror room, again searching for answers. He lit candles, opened scripture, called to saints, but his reflection refused to appear. Instead, he saw himself but silent, still, not moving, and bleeding from the mouth. Behind him, a massive figure formed an angel, wings draped in chains, blindfolded, holding a shattered trumpet. The mirror cracked, and a voice finally came through, but not from the room, from the air itself. Heaven has been sealed. The choir no longer sings upward. The Creator does not sit on the throne, and the silence is not peace. It is anticipation. Final scene. The note from nowhere. That night, a parchment appeared on the chapel altar. No one saw it placed. On it, a single line, burning it written into its surface. He who speaks next will awaken the one who answers from beneath. Abigail touched the parchment. A sound began to rise from beneath the monastery. Not a voice, a heartbeat. And then, for the first time in history, the stars blinked. Not twinkled, not moved. Blinked, as if something enormous had opened its eyes from behind them. Episode 10. The Saint Who Burned North East God. Opening line. They burned him for trying to set God on fire, but the real heresy was that he almost succeeded. Scene 1. The Red Saint's return. For days, the monastery had lived beneath a soundless sky and prayerless nights. Then, on the 10th morning, a new mark appeared on the stone floor of the chapel, a circle of ash. Smoldering faintly, its edges lined with Sudesh scripture no one could read. Abigail approached it slowly. Someone has walked back, she whispered. Someone the church erased not to punish, but to protect itself. Matthias asked quietly. Oh, she didn't answer, but the flames inside the ash circle did. They spelled a name not in Latin, but in holy fire. Saint Alien, keeper of the flame that dared to touch God. Scene 2. The Lost Gospel of Fire. Simeon, deep in the restricted library, discovered a torn manuscript hidden behind false bindings in a book of Psalms. It bore the seal of the Inquisition. Its ink had long since faded except for one phrase at the top. This gospel is not to be read, it is to be endured. The margins were scorched. Every sentence written burned the reader's eyes, and metaphorically. Literally, Simeon had to pour holy water on his hands to stop the stinging, but he managed to translate one passage. And he stood before the throne and cried, "You are not the only fire." He lit his faith and flung it at the heavens. Matthias stared at that page. Did he mean to kill God? Abigail replied, no, he meant to wake him. Scene 3. The trial that was never recorded. That night, Abigail led Matthias into the vault beneath the chapel, place once sealed by 7 bishops. There, etched in black flame onto the walls, was a forgotten story, a saint who stood before a celestial council and accused the Creator of abandoning his creation. He did not pray, he confronted. He declared, if the Almighty is love, then why do the stars scream when they die? If the Almighty is just, then why did he leave silence in place of justice? They excommunicated him. They branded his soul. They tore out his name from Scripture. But they could not kill him, because his flame was not earthly. It came from within the silence itself. Scene 4. Fire from the mouth of a prophet. Abigail collapsed during Vespers. When she awoke, her eyes burned gold. Her voice cracked with heat. She stood before the altar and began to chant words not heard since the fall of Babel. The wind caught fire. The cross above the pulpit twisted and wept flame. And in her voice, another voice spoke through. I walked into his presence with open hands. I left with ash on my tongue. I offered him my doubt, and he offered me no answer. So I set my soul ablaze, to see if fire would reach where faith had failed. Abigail's body trembled. The flames around her danced in chaos, but in worship. Scene 5. The brand of the saint. At midnight, a mark appeared on Matthias' chest, burning through his robes. The shape was unholy and divine all at once. A crown made of thorns, wrapped in fire. Abigail explained, you've been chosen to bear the saint's trial. His flame did not die. It scattered into those who dared to love God and question him. Now, the time comes to relight it. The ground split open in the nave. A staircase of charred stone descended, glowing dimly from heat below. At its edge stood a figure cloaked in flame, not consumed. His face was veiled in ash, but from his hands came no threat, only light. The voice that emerged shook the monastery's foundation. I did not burn God in hatred. I did it because I refused to pray to something that stopped listening. Now, a fire returns, and it will test everything. Final scene. The fire that listens. The monks gathered in silence. The crucifix melted. The candles burned blue. And from deep below the monastery, a second sun began to rise in it in the sky. But from beneath, as the stone glowed red hot, Abigail turned to Matthias. You asked for answers, but fire doesn't answer. It reveals. And what we're about to see was never meant to be spoken. The bells tolled 15 times. The fire reached the altar, and heaven did not respond. Episode 11. Mass for the Damned Northeast. Opening line. It was not a mass to save souls. It was a liturgy for the forgotten, those who were cast out not for their sins, but for the questions they asked. Scene 1. The shadowed sanctuary. After the saint, of fire vanished into the molten depths below the monastery. Silence fell again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the breath before an invocation. The monks could not sleep, their dreams filled with a voice chanting a song no one had taught them, a melody full of grief, an invocation. Brother Simeon carved the words into his own arm in his sleep. Mass for the damned shall begin at the hour when the stars blink twice. Prepare the altar of ash. At that very hour, the stars blinked twice, and a procession of hooded figures, some monks, some unrecognizable, began descending into the underchapel. Ropes trailing smoke, seen to the preparation. Father Matthias stood before the altar. Abigail approached, dressed in black robes laced with burnt gold thread. This Mass is not for salvation, she said. It is not for God. It is not even for the dead. It is for those who were never given names in the book of life. She handed him a chalice seen as silver, but obsidian, worn to the touch. Blood won't be enough tonight. This requires remembrance. Around them, the chapel morphed, was receding into shadow. Pillars stretching into infinity. Icons weeping wax that whispered forgotten names. These were the first to kneel, Abigail murmured, and the first to be ignored. Scene 3. The liturgy begins. The Mass commenced in complete darkness, no candles, no choir, only breath. The first reading came not from Scripture, but from a broken jawbone, held by a faceless monk. He recited, "Blessed are those who were promised heaven, but handed silence. Blessed are the damned, for they still believe." The Eucharist was not bread but ash, compressed into wafer-thin discs. When consumed, it brought visions of angels with torn wings weeping over empty thrones, of children abandoned by prayers, of a throne cracking beneath the weight of unkept promises. The congregation wept not in fear, but recognition. They had felt abandoned, forgotten. Now, they were being called. Scene 4. The bell that never rang. At the climax of the ritual, a bell Saturday on the altar, a relic said to have never once sounded since the monastery's founding. Legend said it was forged for a Mass that should never be heard. Abigail lifted it with trembling hands. Matthias whispered, "If it rings." She nodded. "Then the damned will know they've been heard." She rang it once. It made no sound, but every window shattered, every mirror cracked, every monk dropped to his knees, screaming it in agony. But in revelation, because the sound was not heard through ears, it was heard through memory, and every soul that had ever been denied salvation remembered what they were before they were cast out. Scene 5. The names that were never spoken. One by one, the congregation rose. Each monk now whispered a name not of saints, but of souls' history never allowed to exist. Names that trembled with truth. Names that had no place in liturgy, but had always been there, waiting to be said. Abigail stood tall, her voice rising above all others. "This is a Mass for the ones you buried with silence, the ones you erased with Scripture, the ones you feared because they saw God's shadow and loved Him anyway." And then, from beneath the chapel floor, down scenes of hands pressed upward against the stone, not clawing, reaching. Final scene, the response. For the first time, the ground above Mount Lazarus glowed not from fire, but from within the stone itself, a light neither holy nor hellish, a third light. The damned had not come to be saved, they had come to join the song. And in the distance, from deep beneath the monastery's bones, a voice, older than Scripture, whispered, "Now we are one voice," and the veil has thinned. Abigail collapsed to her knees. Matthias approached her. "What happens next?" he asked. She smiled through blood and ash. "Now, we open the door." Episode 12. Abigail. Opening line. She was not born. She was remembered. Scene 1. The door beneath the altar. The floor of Mount Lazarus no longer held. Stone had become breath. Ash had become prophecy. And at the heart of it all, beneath the altar where no Mass had ever dared to reach, a door waited. It was not made of wood or gold. It was made of nameless, every soul forgotten by heaven, every voice unrecorded, every cry that reached no ear. And it was Abigail who stood before it now. Not the child, not the vessel, but something older than prayer. Matthias whispered, "Is it hell?" She shook her head gently. "Hell is where they were sent. This is where they watched and waited for someone to speak for them." Scene 2. The memory of God. The door pulsed. Every monk stood in reverent silence. The stars above the chapel flickered in patterns, but in heartbeat rhythm. As Abigail raised her hand to the threshold, her skin shimmered, not like light, like pages turning inside her veins. Scripture danced living, breathing, bleeding. She looked at Matthias, and for the first time, her voice did not carry power, or fire, or wrath. It carried grief. I was his final thought before silence. Not an angel, not a demon, not a child. I was the last word he never spoke. And when he buried that word, I became the echo. Scene 3. The opening. She touched the door. It did not swing. It opened inward, as if all of existence were stepping back to let her in. Behind it, not fire, not light, not darkness. Truth, pure and unbearable. The months wept. Simeon tore at his ropes. Some began to float above the floor, their bodies no longer tethered by mass or matter, their mouths forming words that had never been heard by any living ear. Abigail stepped through. The moment she did, reality sang, not a sound, a recognition, a universe remembering the missing note in its creation. Scene 4. The throne room without a king. Abigail walked alone into a chamber suspended in eternity. There was a throne, empty. Above it, a torn veil shredded by silence itself. All around her, echoes of divine absence. She did not kneel, she sat her day, and as she did, the choir of bone began to sing. The saints who never died lit torches of forgotten light. The apostle who preached in hell opened his book once more, and Saint Elian, the one who tried to burn God, smiled for the first time in eternity. Scene 5. The new verse. In the monastery above, time slowed. Matthias held his breath. Then, from the chapel's cracked dome, a single feather floated downward, black on one side, gold on the other. It landed in his palm, and in his heart, a voice whispered it from above or below. But within, creation was not finished. It was paused. She was the final stanza, and now the song begins again. Final scene. The door closes. As the monks looked upward, the stars aligned in a spiral, closing gently like an eye that had seen too much. The door beneath Mount Lazarus sealed behind Abigail, but not with force, with peace, the kind that comes after the answer you never dared to hope for. Father Matthias returned to the altar. He knelt. He did not pray. He simply listened. And far beneath earth, beyond time and fire and silence, a girl's voice sang, and the universe finale sang back.